So, greetings and salutations from Orlando, Florida, where I just recently attended the Tom Woods 2000 event, which was hilarious and fun. And today, I would like to talk about strategy and how previously the sort of expat strategy, the permanent expat strategy, made more sense. But suddenly, I found that the stay and fight strategy is probably superior. Suddenly, I think it's the better option. And I'll tell you why. So, back when I started the channel, back in like 2014 or so, it made more sense to do the multi-flag strategy, where you've got your business over here, your residency over here, your physical person in a third country, a different jurisdiction, so on and so forth. Is what you want to do is play the jurisdictions of different countries against each other. So it just protects you. It's spreading out your geopolitical risk, as they say. And back then that made sense, because to use an analogy, if you one day realize you're a slave and you're on a slave plantation, and you try to talk to the other slaves, and you're like, "Hey, this situation kind of sucks. We should do something about it. Let's rise up. Let's change how things work. Let's take over," or whatever. Well, what's going to happen is the other slaves are going to attack you. They're going to tell you to shut up and get in line, and it's not going to go anywhere. The state is horizontal. That's a Molyneux quote I remember, is the state is horizontal. It is enforced laterally by your fellow slaves. We all keep each other in line. And it's the threat of slave-on-slave violence that keeps us from really doing anything, because you can't do anything on your own. You know, you go to the big house and you try to tell the master to stop being a master. You're just gonna get, beaten up, chained up, killed, whatever. So what's the solution in that scenario? Well, you run away. There's really no other option. If you want freedom for yourself, you have to run away. And you can't really help anyone else that doesn't want to be helped. There's a famous Harriet Tubman quote: "I freed hundreds of slaves, and I could have freed thousands if they only knew they were slaves." So you look back at 2014, the war on terror was still going strong. All the security state stuff was still going strong. I mean, it is still going strong, but it was going strong without much pushback. There was no pushback now, because the anti-war anti-Bush left was in lockstep with Obama at that point. So there was no pushback of any kind. So at that point, if no one's going to fight back, you simply leave. You just go somewhere else, and again, play the jurisdictions against each other. So basically, before the age of Corona, that was the most viable strategy to earn any to earn maximum freedom for yourself or your family or whatever. Doing the permanent expat lifestyle is what made sense. But then the age of Corona came, and we found out very suddenly that the world is a fascist dictatorship led by pharmaceutical megacorporations. And with breakneck speed, they suddenly brought every government in the world to heel. And so it suddenly, trying to play jurisdictions against each other, didn't do a whole lot, because they could project their power into pretty much every single country on Earth. With maybe a couple exceptions, they just ran the show everywhere. So now, at that point, you can't really want to run away from it. And not that you even want to run away from it necessarily in the first place, but there's no other option, because if no one else is fighting, it's just suicide. But now stand and fight is really the only option left. And you can't stand and fight in a foreign country. Like, you have no influence there. You've got fewer connections. You're not part of the culture. Um, you know, it suddenly, like I was in Chile, and Chile turned out to have the worst lockdowns in the world. You know, it was fine before that. Like, the cops were fairly chill. They did not. You didn't have the police brutality level of the United States. It was a fine place to live and not have the state breathing down your neck. But boy, did the state suddenly become Joe Biden as far as breathing down your neck in Chile. And you go to a lot of other countries, and it's not that much different. It's better just about everywhere else, but not that much better. At that point, you're going to be more effective pushing back in your home country. Now, some places are less hopeful than others. You know, if you're in certain places like Chile, perhaps, or if you live in Australia, boy, I don't know if there's any hope whatsoever of pushback. But in most places, the upside of this, the other thing that's really changed, is that the conservative and moderate normies are fighting back. The left overplayed its hand. That's one of the silver linings of this sort of age of corona, sudden whiplash, holy shit, what just happened era. Like, yes, they kind of took over the entire world all of a sudden, and everyone decided communism is cool now. But that means there are masses of normies. I mean, it may not seem like the majority, but even if it's not the majority, it's close to, yeah, I'm guessing probably 40 to 50% of a lot of populations are ready to fight back, or at least push back in some way. So now back to that plantation analogy I had. Well, now the slaves are ready to fight back. There's a critical mass of people ready to push back. So that's why the stand and fight strategy is viable now. And in fact, it's the preferable strategy. If you can be effective at all, you can join with the masses of normies that are pushing back. And beautiful things could come out of this. We could get actual changes out of this. You look at some polls, and a very surprising number of people in the United States are totally fine with the idea of secession. I mean, that's unprecedented. We never thought we would see that happen. But this is a gift the left has given us, inadvertently. So, yeah. Now I'm back in the United States, as you can see. And so now what? I mean, I'll probably still do some traveling, but I think, as I mentioned before, I'll probably stay within North America. Mainly the United States, might visit Canada a little bit here and there. And then Mexico, I'm sure I'll take some trips to Mexico. Mexico is one of those places that is weirdly, like, very non-compliant with the globalist Corona regime. But the question becomes, okay, so now how can we fight back? Well, it depends on where you are. Like I said, if you're in a really bad place like Chile or Australia, maybe you do still go for the expat thing, because there's, on your particular plantation, maybe the pushback strategy won't work. But in most places, there does seem to be normies and masses pushing back, and now you have something to do. Now you can fight back. So, hey, it's time to fight, so let's fight. And, what's funny is, I hate to, validate Ronald Reagan too much, but maybe the United States really is the last bastion of freedom on Earth. Like, this is the place where we do have like some of the biggest pushback. This is the place where we have held the line a lot further forward than most other nations. And I think the reason for that is cultural. If you've done any traveling and stayed anywhere for any period of time, you may have noticed, like what I've noticed at least, is that the United States is unique in having this very idea or this culture of individual sovereignty. The sovereignty of the individual simply is not a thing outside the United States. At the cultural level, cultural or philosophical level, it's just not there anywhere else. We were founded on those ideas. If you go anywhere else, you're going to see it's either going to be just total subjugation to a theocracy. You know, everyone is subject to an all-powerful God. Or someplace might be everyone is subject to an all-powerful state. But I repeat myself, it's just a secular religion. So there's some kind of subjugation to an almighty power, right? Or if it's not that, it's some, socialist, commie-leaning idea of the greater good. Like the people matter more, the collective matters more, society matters more. That they have the priority, the greatest good for the greatest number, that sort of thing. The United States is the only place in the world that values the idea of individual sovereignty at the cultural level. Now, obviously, for the longest time, we haven't really expressed that. The people have accepted, subjugation and all kinds of tyranny. But the bottom line is they still assumed that they were free or sovereign while complying or whatever. That's the difference, is the baseline assumption that, we're free or we have individual sovereignty. Even if they don't, they don't like realize the violations of that are happening. There's a baseline assumption that they're free, right? Well, with the ripping of the mask and the leftover playing their hand, they are now pushing and pushing in a way that makes it obvious to the normie in the United States that their individual sovereignty is under attack, that they could lose it, or they've lost it, or it's under threat, and they have to fight to keep it. So that's why we have the pushback we do in the United States, and that's why we have so much more hope here, and hope for even the previous extreme ideas of secession or balkanization or decentralization. So, and the question becomes, what can we do? Well, previously I would have advised, getting involved with politics is silly. Don't bother with politics. But I would revise that to say, get involved in politics, but keep it local. The thing is, it's not nearly as difficult to get positions in places of local power, the town councils and small town mayors and sheriffs and things like that. And if you can help take over your local town or your local area, your county or whatever, that's where you can actually have quite a significant impact there. And local movements can turn into secessionist movements, and in that way you don't even have to worry about like the federal level. You don't even have to worry about the state level that much. If you can get people into like state houses and stuff, that helps a lot too. But just keeping it as local as possible, political action does work at a very local level. And if you're in the United States and you're not aware, the Libertarian Party has a Mises Caucus. And the Mises Caucus has actually been doing very effective things over the last year or so. and they've been getting people elected locally, and they're taking over the Libertarian Party, and it's very exciting stuff. Um, I met some of those guys here at the Tom Woods event. Um, Actually, by next year, they're probably going to take over the National Libertarian Council. So, and then their whole strategy is focused on local takeovers. So that is the kind of thing you can do. Other than that, obviously, you can do sort of the prepper thing, but doing it in a network-based way, so that you're building like local communities, getting out of cities. A lot of people have talked about that. Forming communities that are outside of cities, and building parallel infrastructure, all that stuff. So, and getting around the COVID stuff, however, pulling your kids out of school, homeschooling, starting homeschooling networks, unschooling networks, things like that. So that's the sort of thing that we need to start doing now. So get involved in local politics. If you don't want to do that, get involved in local community building. And all of that stuff we do all of that stuff with the goal of cutting off the head of the snake. And we don't have to actually cut it off ourselves. It's more about like strangling the head of the snake by just removing ourselves. We're not really cutting off the head of the snake. We cut our localities off from the neck, and then the head of the snake just falls off because there's nothing there anymore. This is how we make balkanization happen, secession, or at the very least, reinstating states' rights. And there's other countries where this works too. Canada actually has a very recent precedent for secession. You've got the East that was more like the liberal Frenchies wanting to secede, and the Western Canada wants to secede from the East because they're, what does the East offer? So there are secessionist movements in Canada. Things haven't been looking that great in Canada recently, but it's a possibility. And in whatever country you're in, okay, secession isn't necessarily going to be a thing, but whatever pushback there is, support those normies. Get your hooks in them, get your ideas in them, and help guide them to help them understand what's going on and what needs to be done, and why the ideas of freedom and individual sovereignty are the solution to this. And of course the action that is required to support those. So anyway, the multi-flag strategy and balancing jurisdictions against each other. I mean, it's still a perfectly good thing to do for yourself if you're in a position to do it. Maybe getting passports elsewhere, and especially for tax purposes or finances or whatever. Spreading out your geopolitical risk. If you can do it, great. Go ahead and do it. But the main strategy, the more viable strategy that you should probably focus on now is stand and fight.